Hello, friend. This is a presentation I recently gave to the San Diego Rock Art Symposium about a discovery I made, so I hope you enjoy it.
First of all, I just want to say I'm really happy to be here. I love this symposium. It's so fun for me, and I'm really grateful you guys let me participate. So thank you.
Our pleasure.
All right, so let's get started here. Okay, my name's Angeline Duran, and I'll be showing you my process and the tools I used, which led me to discover that an archaeological site in the Anza Borrego Desert of California has June solstice hierophanies that should designate it as a Kumeyaay June solstice observatory. On the June solstice of 2019, I came to visit a particular rock shelter within Piedras Grandes, and this is not a photo of that rock shelter, but it is one of the stunning large stones, aka natural megaliths, aka Piedras Grandes, for which the area is named. And this one in particular is about 2 stories tall, so you just get the idea of the scale of a lot of the rocks there at in this area. So the site I'm presenting is recorded as archaeology site number CASDI 1290. And this is a peek into the interior of the shelter from the threshold of the shelter, sort of as you enter it there. So I'd previously visited this site in February of 2017, and I saw a large wedge of light projecting onto the floor of this particular rock shelter, and I was struck by how that wedge of light came so close to piercing a darkened concave area on the west wall of the shelter. This is a close-up of that blackened concave space and the light interaction at 12:25 p.m. on February 12th of 2017. So since I've been unable to return during the winter solstice or equinox to view the light progression in this shelter, since then, actually, I should say, since then I've been able to return in winter or equinox, but I was able to go during the June solstice of 2019, and so my findings are the subject of this presentation. Let's start that. I know video is really choppy in these kind of presentations, but it doesn't matter because you get the gist. But there are 3 small grinding features on the boulders that comprise this shelter. So this is one of them. Whoops. Okay, and there we go. Atop the boulder with the west-facing exposure is a giant stone feature that's common in this region of the desert that in local rock art vernacular has come to be called a Yoni because of its resemblance to women's genitals. So in the abstract describing my presentation, I refer to this boulder as a naturally occurring megalith because that word is the best word I could come up with to emphasize the monumental size and breadth of the stone, as well as the substantial size of the Yoni figure on top of it, which is approximately 3 feet long, 3 feet tall. And both of these are openly visible when you walk east along the adjacent hill. Oh, what's happening? Okay, this is a view to the outside from within the shelter, looking toward the north. And the boulder to the left with that blackened kind of triangle feature that's the boulder that has the Yoni on its back west facing side. So the side of the boulder that's outside of the shelter, the exposed side, that's where the Yoni is on that rock. This is the rear or southeastern window through which the wedge of light projects onto the floor of the shelter. And here is a west-facing triangular opening near the ceiling. The lower boulder in this arrangement, that lower hump there, that's the same boulder with the Yoni on it. So in essence, if you were small enough to climb out that little window, you'd climb right on top of you'd be crawling right out on top of that Yoni. above the west-facing window is a notch that, in my experience, is the type of opening that allows for a sun dagger to cast on the opposite wall, which in this case may occur in the afternoon. And this is that opposite wall that I'd be keeping an eye on this day to see if there does come a sun dagger. So given that the shaft of life on the floor was the feature of interest that I came to watch, I set up my GoPro camera to time-lapse. And then I had about 11 hours to kill to see, as the day passed. So I kind of was just sitting around, and I looked at to the sort of the side of me there where I was sitting in this shelter, and there was a little mess of charcoal and sand, and I saw in amongst that this small ear of charred corn cob. And I don't know if the pack rats dragged this out, or if maybe someone else found it and placed it at the back of the shelter, but it's one of those small kind of southwestern corn cobs, so I thought that was interesting. And there was also a small piece of charred pottery near the corn cob, sort of in the same little charcoal area. So as I mentioned, one of the boulders comprising the shelter is this feature. These yonis have been determined by geologists to be naturally occurring and not culturally enhanced. I know, I don't believe it either, although I have to, because that's what the evidence claims. So these occur naturally, and it's really just amazing. In this case, the central axis appears to be caused by the erosion of a crystalline vein that runs east-west. So this white line is that crystalline vein, that line kind of going from bottom to top in the center of this photo. That's this kind of crystalline vein. And here's a close-up of the erosion of that vein along the central axis of the Yoni formation. I've seen crystalline, so this is actually kind of a question as well as a statement that I kind of want to present to you. I've seen crystalline veins and other types of geologic formations that have uncannily precise arrangements or alignments with the cardinal directions. And I've often wondered if it could have something to do with the effect that Earth magnetics have on minerals during a change of state from gas or liquid to solid. So if there's a geologist out there who has any ideas about this topic, please contact me afterwards so I can learn more about it. It's kind of common, and it's intriguing. Nothing to do with this presentation except for the coincidence of this actually being an east-west alignment. So I just wanted to point that out. Oh, okay. Near what I will call the top or the narrower portion of this yoni, the east end of the yoni, there's a symmetrical arrangement of cracks that form a cross. And when I laid my compass on top of the origin at the center of the cross, what I saw was that the axes of the cross correspond almost exactly to the magnetic cardinal directions. So just be patient and stay with me till the end of this, because at sunset is when the expected payoff, or unexpected rather, payoff to this whole day's exploration ended up showing itself. Okay, so as I said before, at this point I have probably about 10 hours to pass. So, to pass the time, I brought out my star chart app, in which you can hold the app up to the sky and input any time, day, or year to see where celestial objects would appear at that time. And I started looking for where solstice sunrises and sunsets would appear just above the surrounding landscape. The app suggested that when viewed from the Yoni, the June solstice sun would likely set directly in a prominent saddle on the visible horizon. I kind of just indicated that here with a little graphic. So I thought this was really exciting and was pretty eager to see if it would actually do that, but if holding an app up to the sky like that really could predict where that sun was going to set on this day. So, I was pretty anxious to see if that, how that played out. And then on the other side of that is another habitation site and cave-like rock shelter with many pictographs. Two of these images here are de-stretched so you can see them better. And one's a reproduction that the park made that illustrates the fading images on the rock. So I just thought I'd throw that in there for you to see. So back at the Yoni, I started playing with the shadows on the Yoni by using the only straight stick I had, my tripod, as a gnomon. And placing it at the origin of the axes on the cross, I used my star chart app to predict where the shadows might fall at sunrise and sunset on solstices and equinoxes. The boulder is sloped, so I chose the gnomon's proper angle to be its balance point, which would make it perpendicular to the earth. So how I did that was I just, I made the tripod, put the legs as close together as I could, make it as straight as I could, and then would kind of just balance it by releasing my hand for a moment and finding its balance point. So then I knew it was perpendicular to the earth, and I chose that as my way to measure. So I figured if I'm not saying that did, but if one were to use a gnomon on this feature, that would likely be the only way to figure out if it was straight. So this is a rough diagram of how my experiment combined star chart alignments with shadows from my gnomon projected from the origin, which is that red dot there, and I labeled it gnomon. This photo maps how gnomon shadows might intersect the radiating lines outside the Yoni. Although I find these intersections compelling, these predictions absolutely remain to be tested during future real-time observations. Currently, there's no recorded evidence of the human language-speaking Kumeyaay of this region using gnomons, but neighboring coastal people, the Chumash, the Hokan language speakers, used both short, angled sun sticks and long, straight sun poles that were planted in the ground on solstices. And desert neighbors, the Cahuilla, Euro-Aztecan language speakers, used sticks to gauge the sun's placement throughout the year. Perhaps other Euro-Aztecan neighbors, such as the Tongva, Luceño, and Juaneño, did as well. I absolutely make no assertion that the Kumeyaay used gnomons at this site. I just want to be clear about that. But it's just a tool I chose to use to satisfy my own curiosity. So meanwhile, back inside the shelter, you remember that rear window. This is a time lapse of the wedge of light projecting onto the floor of the shelter beginning at 11:40 a.m. At 1 p.m., I've inserted here a view of the sun's position in the narrow portion of the rear window. So the sun passes right over that. And then back to the time lapse. I pause it again at 1:36 p.m., where the point of light comes closest to the dark concave feature. It did not reach as close to that feature in June as it did in February. At this time, I noticed that a wedge of light was beginning to creep into the shelter from atop the Yoni boulder. So I continued my time lapse from that higher vantage point so I could watch both wedges from the same camera angle. And this is that time lapse. So the Chumash, as I said before, used portable sun sticks that they would plant in the sand inside solstice caves. There's no ethnographic nor archaeological evidence that the Kumeyaay used Chumash-style sun sticks. The Kumeyaay did, however, use sand paintings in ceremony, and a question I would ask is if sand paintings or other portable paraphernalia may have been used at a site like this in conjunction with the sun. This is the dagger-shaped opening on the west wall, and this is a view of the sun dagger that did, in fact, cast on that east wall at 6:57 p.m. The dagger appears and disappears relatively quickly. So between the time that I actually took this photo and then reached for my other camera to take a video of it, it disappeared within a matter of seconds, less than 15 seconds. So the dagger of light may at first blush seem insignificant as it doesn't align with a petroglyph or other prominent feature on the wall. But in fact, the disappearance of this dagger from the wall signals the event of the sun touching the horizon and beginning to descend into its evening resting place. So as that dagger disappeared from the wall, I hopped outside and I saw that this is what was happening outside. The sun is starting to set right there on the horizon. So at that same moment, I balanced my gnome in shadow, the gnome in the center there, and the shadow starts inching south. It's not quite aligned with that center crack. It's moving from it's moving more east to the east-west axis. And why did I just say? Oh yeah, the east-west axis is that center axis. So it's moving more toward that center crack there, and it's not quite there yet though, because it's not quite sunset yet. And this is just a close-up of that, how it's looking at this time. So it would seem that the star chart app is reasonably accurate, because in the morning it predicted that the sun would set in the saddle. And here we are at 7:22 p.m. and it's falling directly down into that saddle. Okay, so 7:17 p.m. This is my tripod gnomon standing at its balance point with its base resting on the origin there. Notice how I have one rogue tripod leg protruding out to the left side. I indicate the leg and its shadow by putting yellow lines next to them. That leg and its shadow are to be ignored here because it is the one leg that's not bearing weight when the gnomon is balancing. At the balance point, the two other legs, which are, they're closer together there, they're standing. I was excited, so I started being, I didn't notice I had a rogue leg. But so at this balance point, the other two legs are standing together on the rock, and they are casting the accurate shadow. So this is at 7:17 p.m. And what I want to draw your attention to on the shadow, the accurate shadow, is that the shadow, you kind of can't see it. It disappears into the natural shadow of the radiating crack that extends east along the crystalline vein. There's a little bit of a closer look. So you can see that rogue leg over there making that skinny shadow, whereas the two that are there in line with the crack that are bearing the weight of my gnome, and that's the balance point. Their shadow, you can see their shadow, but also you can't see it because it falls right there in the natural shadow that the crack is making on itself. The gnomon is not needed to appreciate this alignment because it's accurate even to the naked eye, as you can see in this photo. But the precision of the gnomon demonstrates how extraordinarily precise, down to the exact line, this alignment really is. This is the progression of last light at 7:24 p.m. So my conclusions after this day of observation is that this site has two distinct hierophanies. The first being the June solstice sun passing through the south window of the shelter on the June solstice at 1 p.m. The second is the June solstice alignment with the central axis of the Yoni, and I would count a third, which is the disappearance of the sun dagger on the east wall of the shelter at the moment the sun appears to touch the horizon and begins to descend into the saddle. So given that this site has evidence of human use in the form of grinding features, and that it's in close proximity to several other sites with even more pronounced evidence of habitation, I suggest that the Kumeyaay also observed these hierophanies and recognized this site as a June solstice observatory. The sun wedges that progress along the floor of the shelter and the other that creeps into the shelter through the west window are notable, but absent evidence of their interaction with ritual paraphernalia, sand paintings, or prominent physical features in the shelter, I draw no conclusions about how they may have been observed by the Kumeyaay, if at all. Whether there are other hierophanies appearing at this site during December solstice or equinox remain to be seen. I plan to visit this site more often in the future to observe the sun at different times of the year, and perhaps I will return to the symposium one day to present additional findings. My hope is that this demonstration of the many ways the sun interacts with this site on the June solstice may be a useful tool for you in the future. Here is a list of a few of my references. Please email me if you would like at angelinedp.com. And thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you, Angeline, very, very much. Be sure to put your email on the chat room. That'll make it easier for people to contact you. Hopefully that'll work out well. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, Ken,